first and last mistake. I'm blue without your faith. But what can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a pair of lips that I've lost in the moment. All I want is for you to come back. Now I'm caught in the middle of life, and I need you to survive.
Good morning. Good morning, Rashid. I cannot hear you yet. I cannot hear you. I don't hear you. I only hear music. I only hear music, Rashid. I don't hear you. I only hear music. Okay, no audio yet.
Can you hear me now?
Very slightly, very slightly. Can you dial it up?
Hold on one second. Yeah, I can dial it up. Hold on. We've been upgrading the we've been trying to. Can you hear me now?
I hear you now. Yes.
Okay.
Now I hear you.
Yeah, we've been upgrading the equipment. Yeah, we've been upgrading the equipment. I'm sorry, everybody. And my son is not here to be the technical guy. He's not in the room, so I'm dumb as a brick when it comes to it. So he left me to do this stuff, and this is what you get. But Pascal, you didn't have to do it, but I really, really appreciate it. And let's just get into it. Right now, Europe has followed the United States in sanctioning Russia, backing the United States on its Iranian foolish plans to try to conquer the Iranians. They bagged the United States in overthrowing the Venezuelan government. Now Europe is in a heat crisis, and they're also suffering an energy crisis and a debt crisis, and the United States is also in the same predicament. Um, they say fools fall in love. Are these two, the United States and the EU, fools? And it's the policy of both nations showing the world that they are no longer able to lead the world.
Well, both continents, Europe and North America, the US are in quite dire straits at the moment because of all the things that you enumerated, and most of it, maybe with the exception of the heat crisis, are basically self-made, right? There's these are holes that they dug themselves. The Iran war is a absolutely 100% unnecessary war that, in my view, is not over yet. We are seeing a break, and most people that I talk to on my channel, they agree that the next round will probably come. The most cynical interpretation is that Donald Trump wanted this memorandum of understanding in order to have a quiet World Cup. And we are seeing now, I first dismissed that as pure cynicism. But now looking at how Donald Trump is intervening even in FIFA affairs in order to secure a U.S. victory, canceling red cards and whatnot, it's maybe not that far-fetched anymore. And the crisis that result from all of this is, of course, then also the outcome of decades of mismanagement. Actually, I mean, the fact that the United States cannot win this self-chosen, self-inflicted war against Iran has also much to do with the state of the military and with the state of its industrial capacity, because we are now learning, and most of us are quite a bit surprised, that the United States just doesn't have the material capacity to actually implement its goals. It's not just that Iran is a much tougher nut to crack. The nutcracker itself is in really bad conditions. So it's once upon a time the US Navy was what the British Navy was in the 19th century, right? It was the unrivaled, unmatched power of the sea that could implement even and strike deep into countries that it targeted. I mean, think about it 20 years ago against Iraq. And then do a huge ground invasion using the Navy, of course, as part and parcel of from where the ground invasion would be started and supported from, in order to give air support. Because forget not, the largest air force in the world is the U.S. Air Force, and the second largest air force is also the United States with the U.S. Navy. I mean, it's insane the firepower the U.S. has, or that it used to have, because turns out that this firepower doesn't mean very much anymore. So this one is a huge pickle, and then the other huge pickle is, of course, Ukraine, and the way the Europeans are now trying to pick up the pieces, and instead of putting the pieces back together, they try to smash them even more, because their unabated Russophobia is now leading them into a straight large confrontation with Russia. The way that the Europeans are attacking currently mainland Russia really makes me worried a lot. The attacks is, of course, drones and missiles manufactured inside European countries and then shipped to Ukraine for assemblage, and then Ukraine uses NATO targeting and NATO intelligence and NATO satellite systems and so on, essentially also European systems, in order to deliver those weapons into Russia and explode civilian and military infrastructure. And this is something that, during the Cold War was absolutely unthinkable, and by now the Europeans think it's commonplace. And the question is, will Russia continue to pretend that this is fine? And on my channel, I have different opinions. One says that Russia is now seriously rethinking this and is probably going to try to reestablish its red lines, the kind of, in the Russian sphere, the Karaganov doctrine, that now Russia needs to put its foot down and actually start bombing places inside Europe in order to tell the Europeans that Russia is not a joke. And then you have other interpretations, the Brovkin interpretation, which says that no, what Russia is doing is it is enhancing its capacity to absorb. The more the Europeans or the Ukrainians fire drones and missiles, the more the Russians learn how to intercept those. And we see that as well. The individual drone attacks and so on are still happening, but less and less are getting through. So the Russians are actually taking advantage of the situation and learning how to deal with this kind of stuff. At the same time, they are advancing on the battlefield in Ukraine. And the Brovkin interpretation is that that this is the answer of Vladimir Putin. Instead of escalating, he just speeds up the battlefield in Ukraine in order to bring that part to a close, maybe within this year or next year. Which one it is, I don't know, but either scenario is not good for the Europeans. Either scenario leaves them, in the best case, with their pants down. In the worst case, it will leave them dead. So it's, to me, it's a huge screw up.
I have a somewhat different take on the things, because I listen to what the politicians say, and I also look at the actions that follow. And I remember Pete Hegseth, I remember Marco Rubio going to Europe, and they were talking about a division of labor, because
Yeah.
the United States was stretched, and so the leaders would put pressure on Russia. So this idea that these leaders in Europe are lunatics, doing this without the approval of America, I don't buy that. I think everything that they're doing is strategic with the American approval, because there's no way these leaders would do these insane things without American okay. So I believe that what America is doing now, she's trying to come up with some type of small wins to try to um, mark her territory back as the global hegemon, and at the same time try to buy time to weaken Russia by using the European Union as proxies to keep this going, to bleed Russia slowly, hoping that Russia doesn't strike out in Europe. With that said, I think times are changing quickly. The world is seeing America as a emperor or close, in Europe as a proxy that depends too much on the United States, and neither one has the military capacity to continue these endeavors, and neither one has the economic wherewithal to finance these endeavors. And on top of that, whatever political capital that both had together, they spent it when they went into Venezuela, when they allowed for the attacks on Iran multiple times. What is your response?
No, I think you're right. I don't think that the Europeans are doing anything against the wishes of the United States, especially not against the wishes of the intelligence agencies or the NATO structures. This is very much integrated. The Again, like nothing that happens in Ukraine from the Ukrainian side or from NATO side could happen without NATO, without the US approval. If the US closes access to Starlink, if the US closes access to its own like military satellites and stops intelligence sharing and put any kind of pressure on the other side, it would just stop. I mean, they just wouldn't be able to do this anymore. So everything we are seeing, if we see an explosion of drones somewhere in St. Petersburg, it is done not only with the approval of, but the active help and probably the strategic planning of NATO, aka the United States, because least we forget, NATO is the military strategic implementation arm of US military policy in Europe. The highest the job of the Secretary General is held by a European, Mark Rutte, right? And it's traditionally held by a European, but that is the political figurehead of the whole thing. That's the CEO, the guy who goes around and does the whining and dining and schmoozing and so on. The actual military side of NATO, the military general on top, who sits on top of the military ranks and pushes down his orders, is always an American since the very beginning in 1949 until today. Not once was that position held by a non-US general, right? So the picking order is quite clear, and the only thing they care about is how to sell that kind of as a collective of equal states, blah 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 blah. It's not equal states. The Europeans are clearly subordinated, and what you said is absolutely correct. The whether this is in fact the kind of division of labor, which is also the main argument of Brian Berletic, I would say that there are probably different interpretations of that same strategy. I wouldn't say that everybody inside NATO or inside Europe would share the idea that we're just playing a little game and we're just pretending that we are fighting, but actually we're doing the same. I'm certain that group of people exists, but I'm also certain that you have another group of people which is, oh, we need genuinely more strategic autonomy. The kind of French types who, it doesn't really matter that much, because the end result of both of these strains of thinking, the division of labor people and the strategic autonomy people, the end result is the same. if the underlying idea is we do it in order to better confront Russia, right? So it doesn't even matter what they believe. The end result will be what Berletic and what you are calling a division of labor. But again, the biggest problem these people have is that they're lacking the capacity these days. The Russians are just better at basically everything from industrial production to military production to military deployment to recruiting for their armies. I mean, the Russians didn't even they don't have a general draft at the moment, right? The Ukrainians do. The Ukrainians pick off their these poor souls from the streets of Kiev or wherever in the countryside, put them into buses and send the meat to the front in order to die there. It's absolutely horrible. It's a horrific thing, but it shows you which side has more active support at this after 4.5 years of war. And so that's just to say that on the Russian side, you're not struggling with these kind of things. On the Ukrainian and NATO side, you do. And if we then enlarge the picture in Iran, we've just seen over the weekend this massive funeral for the slain Iranian leader Ali Khamenei. Massive support, right? And this is the kind of crowd that the West wanted to see on the street in order to overthrow that person. Now they're there to commemorate his killing, right? And we don't even need to start speaking about the Chinese, who we luckily haven't seen in action yet. We don't know. We haven't seen any kind of Chinese kind of active military combat, and I'm glad about that, because everything we've seen from their drone shows and from their massive capacity to build ships in these huge shipyards for the Chinese Navy tells me that of these three, it's actually China that has the largest and best equipped and most advanced army, and I do not want to see that being used at any point in time. But this leaves a pretty bleak picture for the US-European war alliance, which keeps thinking that it is the top notch, the best of the best, and the top of the heap for the last 500 years, and still so far ahead. But in fact, it's actually number 4, 5, or 6 below the other three. Now, I just hope that at some point sinks in, because if it does, it will definitely change the whole war-making calculation. If it doesn't, then you have this stupid little underdog, this chihuahua, that thinks it's a bulldog, and if it tries to act like a bulldog, like a real bulldog, then, well, it will bleed pretty badly. So we'll see.
Well, I happen to think that because the United States and Europe now see a changing paradigm, and I'm not just talking about militarily, I'm talking about economically, I'm talking about culturally, industrially, manufacturing wise, everything is shifting from west to east, and they have been the dominant power for the last 5 centuries. I think this is driving the irrational thinking, the irrational policies, and these moves by the United States and their proxies in the EU, because in a way, some of it is a racist policy, because when they look at China, China is it's a non-white, non-Western nation, and how dare China rises up to compete against the United States and act outside of the so-called rules-based international order. And so I think because the world is changing so quickly and so dramatically, and it is moving outside of the grasp and control of the Western world, I think that they see a limited time, a limited window to do something. So I was, as you were talking, I was just thinking about Marco Rubio and what he said, and I'll play the clip. It's about 20 seconds. But before I play the clip, I want to give you what Google AI has to say about users. And he talks about the old world is ordered. The old world order is over. We're changing into something else. So this is what AI Overview says. A changing world order refers to a fundamental shift in the global balance of power, wealth, and geopolitical influence. It describes periods when a dominant established global power declines and a new rising power takes over, accompanied by major changes in international agreements, monetary systems, and global governance. So that is something to keep in your mind when you hear what Mr. Rubio has to say as he got off this plane here.
The world is changing very fast right on us. The old world is gone, frankly, the world I grew up in, and we live in a new era of geopolitics, and it's going to require all of us to sort of re-examine what that looks like and what our role is going to be. And we've had many of these conversations in private with many of our allies. They are our allies.
So, what is your take on this? He, in some certain senses, he's admitting that we're living in the midst of a global change, one world going out and a new world coming in. We know that science teaches us that two objects cannot occupy the same space at the same time. So, we're looking at a new world order coming in versus a so-called rules-based international order being forced out. And we know that with that change, what did the definition say? A fundamental shift in the global balance of power, wealth, and geopolitical influence occurs. It describes periods when a dominant established global power declines and a new rising over, accompanied by major changes in international agreements, monetary systems, and global governance. Could this be one of the main underlying issues which is driving the irrational, insane policies of the West?
Well, yes, on the most fundamental level, for sure. I think it's just important to keep in mind that the term world order doesn't necessarily need to mean that one or the other power imposes a structure or centers the order around itself. It can mean that, but it doesn't have to. Especially in international relations, we usually refer to world order as the way in which the global structure of our 8 billion people planet is organized. Because however you look at it, right now we're 8 billion. Back after the Second World War, we were somewhere half of that, around 4. In the 19th century, it was a 2.5 or so. You have these people on this planet, right? And this planet is a spaceship, and it just travels through through time and space. And we poor souls down here, we are condemned to self-organizing, right? We have to just do our affairs with each other, and how we organize that has always been the pivotal question of national and international politics, right? What kind of system is being used? Are we in a feudal system where the landlord, the aristocracy literally owns its peasants and whatnot, and they have to give him money and their produce and whatnot, and then you've got a king that sits on top? Or do we live in some kind of democratic systems? Do we live in a capitalistic system, in socialist systems? And these systems, how do they interact with each other? I mean, a big part of the Cold War was about an ideological struggle. Do we organize our countries according to communist principles? Or do we organize them according to capitalism? Now, this was not all. Of course, this was not all. There were always underlying other ideologies and ideas that then fuel competition. But competition itself is part and parcel of this entire the way the world works, right? And some of this competition is outright, and some of it is covert. But you do have competition, and the worst form of that then is direct clashes and warfare and killing, and even mass killing and slaughter and genocide, in order to in order for one or the other system to win and to dominate the rest. Now, when we don't have moments of large scale slaughter, then usually we talk about a form of order, right? So that we, this 8 billion planet as we are now, is kind of can cooperate, can collaborate without destroying other parts of it. And the way that this is organized, that one is changing. It's constantly changing. Rubio is, I think, alluding to that. Your definition is trying to give that a concrete form so that we can understand what's happening. I think that what Rubio is thinking about is more that the rules of the game are now changing, and that the United States, of course, wants to be part of shaping the new rules and make sure that it can carve out for itself the top dog position. The way that things are going for the US, it seems though less and less likely that it will again sit on top of the whole thing, but it will probably at some point have to come to terms with the fact that it will just be one among many, at least one among three, maybe one among 5 or 6 in the world, and that the ones who are below are not that far below either anymore, and not under the direct control of the US, because for the last 80 years, ever since 45, the US got basically accustomed that when it doesn't like how one of the others conduces their affairs, Indonesia or Vietnam or South America, that it can either declare war and just go in and ram through it, or it does this covertly with covert operations, like in Indonesia, overthrow a government and then just have a puppet regime kill 500,000 people at your behest, and you just you call it a day, and the guy will do the dirty work. The Soviets did a very similar thing within their sphere, and often had their little puppet masters implement in very cruel policies. But so this is kind of, I think, this way in which the US can interact with the world, that one is thoroughly over. We see it now. I mean, the covert action is still to some extent working, but in a limited way. I mean, Venezuela, it was definitely working. Already in Cuba, it's basically just been hitting a wall for the last 60 years. In Iran, they failed. Then they tried overt action. That one is failing. In Russia, they are trying and failing. So you see all of these places where powers, soft, medium, and hard power, are all not working anymore. And that's the new reality. Although I think it's not the reality that Mr. Rubio alludes to, but it is part of this new reality, and the way then in which the new structure of the 8 billion planet will work is less centered around Washington and New York as a financial center, and going to be more distributed. And we see how BRICS is building new payment systems, how each one of these countries is now coming up with payment systems. Even in Southeast Asia, you go to any Southeast Asian country, Thailand, Vietnam, Singapore, Philippines, they have digital payment systems built around national solutions. They're now building on top the kind of infrastructure to exchange those among each other. And those are ultimately not US and Western-led systems. So we are seeing, in a sense, the distribution and the democratizing of infrastructure, and this will still take a while until we get to a point where we have a similar type of integration that we had with the Western SWIFT system and whatnot. But the world is working on that.
I would agree with everything you said, except for we would have to ignore history, and all empires come to an end. And remember, when we're dealing with the American empire, no one has shed as much blood, no one has waged as many wars, and no one has accumulated as much debt as the United States. As a matter of fact, according to Jim Rogers and others, the United States is the largest and the greatest debtor nation in the history of the world, accumulating more debt than all of the nations ever. So we add that to this, and we go back to what we talked about, a changing world order, or a new world order that America wants to be a part of. To be a part of shaping something new, eventually she's going to try to lead it back to the old, because her dynamics, her mind, her thoughts is always to dominate, to always to lead, to dominate, to impose wills on her. So she cannot be a part of formulating something new, because you have to have a new school of thought, a new brain, a new way of looking at things. And we've seen, and we continue to see, that America's thought is to dominate, to wage war, and to bully, and then blame everybody else if she cannot get her way. So for America to be a part, or to have a say, or to be a major player in something new, if that is the case, then eventually, according to science, she would eventually get into it. It may take 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and turn it back to the old. So for us to have something new, we have to have a whole new school of thinking. And let us not forget that empires with less debt, who waged less war, who shed less blood, collapsed, never to be reconstituted again. And I think because America has dominated so thoroughly in the last 80 or 90 years, that it's hard for us to fathom that in this new paradigm, she will neither have a seat at the table as a major player, or she will not have she will not be in a position of this. Just think of what I'm proposing to you, something outside of the box. She has accumulated so much debt that if you put all of the nations on earth together, they cannot help her out of her debt situation. So if that is the case, if that were you, Pascal, and you had an income of $1 million, but you spent $30 million a year, and then when the bill came due, and you no longer are able to live that lifestyle, do you believe that you will still have your penthouses, your cars, and everything else? This applies to nations, governments, and people as well.
This is the one point where I don't completely agree, because the debt issue on the national level, the big difference, the huge difference between you and I and the government is that you and I are legally prohibited from printing money. The government is the only one that can do it. You know, the way modern fiat currency works is that the monopoly of the creation of this what ultimately is credit points, the money you have in your wallet are really just physical denominations of credit points. Like, this is the Japanese government credit point, and you have the US government credit point. They make these, and whether they are physical or just on your bank account doesn't matter. Credit point is credit point, and only the government is allowed to make those, and nobody else is. So that's why government can always, at any point in time, print their way out of their problems. Now, printing, of course, comes with other downstream issues like inflation and whatnot, but you and I can't. And the US dollar has a very specific position in the entire global system. This is also something that will change over time, but in the sense that it is the reserve currency. A lot of people need US currency in order to settle debt among each other. I traveled to Russia the other day, last month, and because I cannot exchange Japanese yen to ruble directly, what I had to do is I had to use my Japanese yen in order to buy US dollars, which then in Russia I could exchange for rubles, right? Because that one has an intermediary function, and it has an intermediary function in a lot of industries, oil, most importantly, petrodollars, but also in other trade and settlement moments. And most importantly, a lot of national governments still want some US dollars. The Japanese government still buys a lot of US bonds. Bonds and dollars are not exactly the same, but bonds is what you then can exchange for dollars and what you can use for trade. So it still works within the same system. The Chinese government still holds a lot. And yes, both of them are decreasing their holdings. That is true, but at the end of the day, what we still see is that despite everything, the US dollar itself and US dollar denominated debt, bonds and stocks are still quite popular on world markets, and the debt that the United States has, I know it looks extremely concerning, and the U.S. government should definitely think about what it uses this debt for. But at the end of the day, that debt is actually a reflection of the desirability of this US denominated debt, because you wouldn't have that if people didn't want it. if nobody bought bonds and stocks in US dollar denominated, then you wouldn't get it. So it's a reflection, and this is capacity that the United States has. It's not infinite, and it does create downstream problems, but I don't view the debt issue as the overarching problem of the United States. Also, historically speaking, we have never seen an instance where a top dog has a currency that completely, utterly collapses, or where that state collapses under the weight of its debt. We haven't seen it with the Romans. They collapsed for other reasons. We haven't seen it with the French or the Spanish. We haven't seen it with the Brits, even though the British lost their top dog position as the world empire. The British pound is still out there, and the British state actually never collapsed under its debt obligations, which it had. I would say the United States dollar will not disappear, and I think it is highly unlikely the US will collapse under its debt. It might collapse for other reasons, maybe for connected reasons, but not for that one alone. So also one more thing to add about what you said in the beginning, short of complete defeat in war, we haven't seen, in my view, an instance where a previous empire just disappeared because well, maybe the Soviet Union, but even the Soviet Union, you have the successor state of Russia that is very much still around and very much still a great power. It took us some time to recover, but we haven't seen a moment when a previous great power just went into utter disappeared from the world stage, short of complete defeat in war. The German Empire went away because it was defeated ultimately in the Second World War, so that one's gone. The Japanese Empire was dissolved, and today's Japan is still around, of course, but it is a shadow of what the empire was 120 years ago. The British Empire kind of got dissolved over time, but what it left is still a pretty large network, the Commonwealth and whatnot, of states that interact with each other, and Britain itself never went under. So I think it's very unlikely that the United States will ever be attacked and defeated on its homeland from anywhere outside. Therefore, I do not think that the US will just collapse and disappear. What I think the most likely thing is to happen is that it will be forced to kind of change its foreign policy approach, and probably at some point be forced to be more inward looking and start caring about its people, instead of, being nominally one of the richest nations on earth with a huge population of poor and homeless, while doing all of this warfare abroad. I think that this change is inevitable. The question is, how long will it take the United States to realize that it should try to clean up at home instead of trying to smash things abroad?
Back to something you said about the British Empire never collapsed, and that is because in its collapse, it hitched on to its child, its daughter, or its sister, the United States. And it tied the United States to it through the stock exchange and through the gold exchange. That's why you have the New York Gold Exchange tied to the London Stock Exchange and Gold Exchange, and the New York Stock Exchange tied to the London Stock Exchange, because they're one and the same when it comes to this. But to not have that luxury to dominate and manipulate the gold and the silver and the commodities as Britain and the United States has enjoyed for so long, that spells the end. Because what does America produce? Nothing. She produces war. She produces movies. She produces dollars. And as you said about the dollars, and I want to bring something up. This is something that we need to understand. According to the United States itself, the number one buyer of U.S. debt is the Federal Reserve. That means that the crack dealer is smoking its own crack now. How long can that go on? Now, when we talk about Japan buying the debt of the United States, it's not because Japan wants to buy. Japan is a colony of the United States. And so uh, Japan that cannot make full sovereign decisions completely. I remember watching a former Japanese prime minister said that relation would be great, and he tried to go through and cover all the issues before, but the United States threatened that if they would follow through, that the United States would take the whole of Okinawa. So this for us to say that that the United States people are buying debt, and I have statistics right here saying that more nations are moving away. The Western world is now feeling more desperate because China and the global South have instituted organizations and banks and everything to rival the West. And also, I want to play you a short clip here while we're talking on this subject.
All right, moving on to more updates from around the world. Now, quiet but significant shift is reshaping global finance. Foreign governments are pulling back from US Treasury bonds, and the numbers tell a striking story. Foreign official ownership of US Treasury securities has fallen to around 13%. That is the lowest level since the 1990s. To understand how dramatic this is, consider this. At the peak of the 2008 financial crisis, foreign governments held nearly 40% of US Treasuries. That share has more than halved since then. Foreign private investors are also stepping back. Their ownership share has dropped to roughly 33%. Again, the lowest since 1990s. But perhaps the most telling signal is coming from Asia. Asia's share of total foreign demand for US Treasuries has fallen by 20 percentage points since 2013. It now stands at just 40%. That's the lowest in at least 15 years. The two biggest drivers, Japan and China. Both nations have been quietly but steadily reducing their treasury holdings for decades. This was a cornerstone of global finance. Asian governments, especially Beijing and Tokyo, recycle their trade surpluses into US government debt. It helped fund America's deficits, it kept US borrowing costs low, and that arrangement is now under visible strain. The question analysts are asking is direct. Is the era of Eastern governments quietly financing US spending coming to an end? There's no single dramatic moment here, no crisis, no announcement, just a slow, steady retreat across years, across governments, and across continents.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very good. This is a very good example of how the changes are happening, and I think she framed it very correctly at the very end. It's this kind of slow changes that these foreign governments are making in also their own distribution of their asset allocation, right? I mean, buying US debt is an asset allocation for Japan, it's an asset allocation for China, and the once upon a time, you wanted to have a lot of these assets in the United States because the United States has a lot to offer and a lot to sell to you, right? So it makes sense that you can then also within the bond market and the stocks market that you keep your assets over there. But the more the United States actually slips from that position, the less attractive it is. The less attractive it also is for foreign investment, direct investment by foreign companies. The less US dollar holdings you need, the less less investment over there you need. And that's actually something the United States fights against actively. This is the whole reason why Donald Trump is trying to coerce foreign governments, foreign states to commit to mandatory investments, right? That's also to prop up the bond and the stock market, and to keep this foreign capital inside the US, which then makes it useful to its own economy. But the economy itself is becoming less attractive. I just again want to say that the most important thing to understand theoretically about money is that money is debt. Debt and money are the same thing. The bank bill that I showed you before, or the bank bills, the US dollar bills that you have in your wallet, are a debt of the US government toward you. So if you reduce the US government debt to zero, you also necessarily reduce the number of bills that you can hold in your wallet to zero. So there is a certain level of debt that is needed to keep a modern fiat currency working. You can oppose fiat currency and say fiat currency themselves are bad. Go back to a gold standard, or go back to gold itself. There are stores of value that are not money, like gold is a store of value that you can hold without it being debt, but you cannot hold modern fiat currency without it being debt. So these two things go hand in hand. The question to me as a socialist is not whether we have a high debt or a low debt. The question is whether we use the money that results from it for productive purposes to the population, whether we use it to buy bridges, to build bridges and canals and ships and trains and highways, and fund people's social insurances and make sure there is food available and so on, or whether we use it in order to go and bomb other people's houses and kill others, right? And this is the kind of allocation that, in my view, is going wrong. I don't view the U.S. National debt as the main problem. I view the allocation of the funds that it generates, that it represents, as ultimately skewed toward the wrong purpose.
See, I think that America is caught in a catch-22. She needs debt. As Gregory Mannarino says, that the whole system is based upon debt, and it feeds upon debt.
Yes, it is.
Now, as America continues to grab resources, there's only a finite amount of countries around the world. So the empire is becoming even more desperate. And when we look at her, we have to look at the magician's sleight of hand. America is the magician, and she uses the sleight of hand and say, look, everybody's buying my debt. But this is not the case. When you look at other nations, they are being forced into, like you said, investing in the United States. Look at Saudi Arabia, Iraq, now Syria, Libya. All of these funds are being forced in the United States. This is why the United States, if you don't play ball, she bombs you. Look what happened to Venezuela. Now they have a Venezuelan fund where Venezuelan oil money revenues come through the United States, and the United States gets a yay or nay say about this. And so it props it up as though that nations are buying and investing in the United States. And in reality, it's not so much. That's the magician's sleight of hand. What I see is that America is becoming more desperate, because if one were to look at China is doing exactly what you said that you would like for it to do. It is producing for its people. It elevated 850 million people out of poverty in 20 years, 30 years. It has state-of-the-art roads, state-of-the-art technology. It is providing jobs. They graduate more professors, more scientists, more engineers than any nation on earth. They've invested in the people. But the this goes back to what I was saying about a new world order. For it to be a new world order, you have to produce new thoughts. And of course, even you say only America is bombing nations after nations because she sees her reign as the hegemon coming to an end. So in this time right now, just looking at her policies, just looking at the way she's dealt with Iran, the way she's dealt with Syria, the way she's double dealing Russia, the way she's backstabbing Europe, the way she's trying to destabilize Africa, the way she's destabilizing South America, the way she's trying to pivot to Asia to turn Asian nations against China so that they can be the bulwark of war against China just in case war breaks out. This does not show a new school of thought. This shows the same old way of thinking. So she cannot produce something new if the thought is old. This is what I'm saying. So for her to be able to produce something new, to sit at a table to help fashion and fathom a new world, she has to have a new school of thought.
Yeah.
And her actions, her policies are showing the same thoughts and actions. This is what I'm saying. We may have all of the good stuff for America. We may want her to be the best, or you may believe that she can do X, Y, and Z. But my sister used to tell me this all the time in high school. When a person shows you who they are, believe them. When you look at, forget the words, look at the actions. Isn't that what Google is built upon? Isn't that what all of these social media sites are built upon? Algorithms. They take the information and what people do over and over again, and they cater to that. Well, we have to take the information that are in us and put it in a sane algorithm, and not for best wishes, but to look at the reality of what she's doing and what she's done and what she's planning for. She's planning for, if she can't win, she's going to kill everybody.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. We should look at the actions, and one of the biggest sleight of hands of the United States has been to profess a completely different way of interacting than it actually does, right? It says, oh, it's a force for good and freedom and liberty and democracy, blah, 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 blah. But it actually does regime change and wars and destruction and empowering its own population and enriching a top elite class of people, right? So we see these the words and the deeds, they don't match. And you're absolutely right. We must peel off the layer of the words to get to the deeds, and then figure out how the algorithm, the US algorithm, actually works. Now, when we talk about world order and so on, the question then is, how do the constraints, the global constraints, and the other players interact with that algorithm, and will they lead to changes in the algorithm? Not because the algorithm wants to change, but because it must change, because it bumps against these walls everywhere, right? It bumps against the Iran wall, it bumps against the Russia wall, it's bumping against the China wall, it's bumping against its own poverty wall internally, against the wall of like hard production capacity issues, that it cannot produce enough missiles anymore. It's just not able to. That's another wall. It might bump against the debt wall that you pointed out, right? And these moments then will necessarily must lead to changes, because without change it cannot continue, right? It will just keep bumping against the wall again and again until it breaks, and the breaking is also a change, right? So change is inevitable. The question is, which way is it going to go? To me, when it comes to the money issue, there's another sleight of hand going on, by the way, because the sleight of hand goes in both directions. Money sometimes, or often, makes us stop at the surface, right? We're like, Donald Trump forced the Japanese to commit to invest $50 billion in the US economy. It means the Japanese have to give the US $50 billion. That's not what it means. That's what it says. What it means is that the Japanese just have a ownership claim of $50 billion somewhere, either at home or already in the US, right? Through government or through the companies that operate. You have that claim. And now what they did is that they said, okay, we're going to give up that claim on $50 billion in exchange for claim on something inside the United States. So instead of having a claim on like cash assets or bonds or stocks, we're going to say we're going to exchange that for a claim on a factory. somewhere in Mississippi, for a headquarter building somewhere in New York State, right? Whatever it is, but what it means is that the Japanese, the Chinese, and others are gonna get more ownership over stuff inside the US. And I swear to you, in a couple of years, this will come to haunt the US, and suddenly they will realize that, oh, a lot of our production facilities are owned by the Chinese, the Japanese, the Europeans, maybe even South Americans, maybe Southeast Asians, and they will start to whine. The offspring of the Donald Trumpers in like 10-15 years are going to cry foul. They're like, why do the foreigners own all of our companies? It's not fair. Well, because you forced them to. What will happen then is that they're going to be talking about expropriation. They will not call it such, but it will be in effect that thing when the government steps in and changes the rules of the game while playing the game. This is also something the United States constantly does. But as night follows day, they will do it again. But this is just to say that the things we see, the sleight of hand, actually works in several directions, and it has these unintended consequences. And one of my predictions is, at some point, you will hear the top brass in Washington on Capitol Hill. They will start whining about foreign-owned enterprises in the US, and that this is a national security threat, and therefore we need to change the rules of the game to protect US interests. It will come because it's the natural outcome of this kind of tariff policy where you force foreign institutions to invest into the US, because investment again means exchange of ownership claim. And the U.S. always has another ace up the sleeve. The next one is going to be expropriations, which any state can do, because all you need is Capitol Hill to get together, write a bill, sign it off, put it on the president's desk. That guy signs it, and it's done, right? That's just how government works. But it's just to say, it's not as clear as it seems from the outside.
Well, what you just said actually is happening now. They're screaming about foreign ownership of things, and look what happened at TikTok. They forced the U.S. branch of TikTok to give over ownership to Palantir owner. They fought even before that. Remember, the Chinese had not Huawei, but the other phone company that was outdoing all of the other phone companies, and they forced them out of the market. And what is showing the world that America is not a fair playing ground, and if you can outdo America in America, then turn the board over and knock over all of the pieces. So it's not conducive to invest, and it's not conducive to be a part of this. So what I think a lot of foreign nations will do, and which they're doing now, is siphoning out their money, and they're going to invest in Asia and Africa. I was just looking at a report that's saying that South Africa is being bum rushed by a lot of because of its infrastructure, and some of that it is being looked at as a major place to invest by foreign investors. So we see a lot of this stuff that America is going through is self-inflicted, but it goes back to that mentality. I'm exceptional, not you. I can do this, not you. And if I do this, how dare you challenge me on this? That line, as you say, as it bumps up into multiple things, there will be a change. But when this change takes place, there will be massive poverty. And there will be. Go ahead. Yeah.
And that's changing. This one is changing. I mean, the others can do it too now, or increasingly are able to do it, and the United States is increasingly unable to do it. So this is what's going to be genuinely new. And I think we're currently in the phase where the United States still acts as if though it could, but it is learning that it's not working, or that the negative consequences from trying to overturn the playing field are so grave that it's going to be disincentivized from doing so. And this, in my view, will create this gradual change toward the next order, in which the flipping of the board is just not on the cards anymore, because you have enough other boards to play on, and that's new, and this is scary. I mean, I understand why the people on Capitol Hill and so on are actively scared, because this is what they view as their prerogative, right? We have the right to do this because, again, a shining city on the hill, best nation on earth. Therefore, we can, we shall, we do. changing. Not gonna work anymore in 10, 15 years down the road.
In closing, and this is the stated policy of the United States, to not allow any nation or combination of nations to rise as a near peer or peer power. And if at all possible, I mean, if necessary, the United States would go to war with them. And we can say, well, this is a formulated policy from the last 20 or 30 years. But people forget that when the U.S. and the Soviet Union faced off and they were close to a nuclear war, the United States policy, which was not announced, was that even though China had nothing to do with it, when the nukes flew, they were going to destroy China too, to not leave China in a position to dominate the world. So the mentality, this is what I'm saying, that's the mentality that they have. And it's hard to get it into people who are not in America. It's hard to get it into their mind that American leaders and American leadership truly believe this insanity.
Yeah. You could make a very cute cartoon here of the United States, Uncle Sam in a car, obsessively looking into the rear view mirror, trying to block anyone who's trying to take over. And then you zoom out just a little bit, and you just see the Chinese car already way ahead, already way going there. And Uncle Sam would understand that if he, for 1 minute, would be looking forward and not be obsessed with the goddamn rear view mirror. But that's where we're at.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Pascal, for joining me. Hopefully I'll be a guest on your show again, man. I really appreciate it. Hey, be safe and be blessed.
You too. Thanks, Rashid. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Everybody listen, please hit the like button and think about subscribing. Also, go over to his channel. Pascal has some of the best interviews that you're going to get. He has some of the top-notch people over there that you will hear from. I mean, people that know their stuff. Go over there and check out his stuff. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. And I like to say this before I go out. Always remember this. My mom taught me these things that I'm passing on to you all. Do right by others, not because there's some material gain to be had or because of some accolades to be won. Do right by others because it's the right, the humane, and the godly thing to do. Because even when no one else is watching you, remember, God Almighty is watching you. And as my late, great, and beautiful mother would always say, God sits high on the throne of power, but he looks low at the actions of man. Know that I love each and every one of you who loves truth, but know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things,
Amen.
Remember to stay righteous. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Peace. We're out of here.
Told you to walk away. That was my first and last mistake. I'm blue without your face. But what can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a